Welcome to a world where the ocean stretches endlessly, whispering secrets of winds and currents that have guided wanderers long before compasses or star maps existed. Where forgotten sailors drifted across vast seas, guided only by intuition, rhythm, and quiet observation. In this journey, you will move gently with the sailors, feeling the swell of waves beneath hulls, the salt in the air, the soft light of dawn and twilight dancing on water, and the subtle presence of life around and beneath, discovering a world measured not by maps, but by perception. The shoreline lingered in the stillness of evening light, its sand washed smooth by the endless rhythm of the tide. Where the forgotten sailors stood with bare feet pressing into the cool grains that clung like a final tether to the land they were preparing to leave behind. The wind moved gently across the coast, carrying with it the mingled scents of salt water and resin from the boats newly sealed with pitch, a fragrance both sharp and comforting. The scent of journeys yet to begin, and of trees long transformed into vessels waiting for the embrace of waves. The boats rested half in water and half on land, their curved hulls darkened with oil. The fibers of their lashings, strong yet softened by years of salt and sun, and the sailors touched the wood with reverence, feeling its grain as though sensing a quiet pulse still echoing from the forests where the trees once grew. Behind them, the village was settling into the hush of night, fires glowing low in clay hearths, smoke drifting upward in thin strands that thinned into the darkening sky, while the faint sounds of children's laughter and women's voices wound through the palm. Groves like threads of a life about to be set aside. The sailors carried little with them, only gourds of water, baskets of dried fish and fruits, woven mats for shelter, and the silent inheritance of knowledge carried not on paper or in charts, but in the remembered ways of reading stars, swells, winds, and birds. Their eyes turned often toward the horizon where the last colors of daylight spilled across the sea, streaks of rose and copper melting into violet shadows. And in that quiet threshold between day and night, they seemed to search not for destination, but for the unseen paths the ocean might yet reveal. Elders stood at the edge of the sand, their figures steady and patient. Hush. Their silence deeper than words, for they had watched countless tides claim sons and brothers to voyages whose endings were unknown. And in their gazes lay the acceptance that some journeys led to return, while others dissolved into endless waters. The youngest of the sailors adjusted ropes with steady hands, their fingers quick and confident, though their hearts beat with the unspoken mixture of fear and yearning. For to leave behind the shore was to leave behind the measure of safety they had always known. The air grew cooler as the sun sank completely, the earth releasing the warmth it had held through the long day. And in that cooling the sailors felt the closeness of night, its softness pressing around them like a vast and patient cloak. Lanterns were lit, their flames trembling in the shifting wind, casting unsteady circles across the sand, flickering against the curves of boats and faces. And in that fragile light the world seemed caught between two realms, one rooted in earth and one dissolving into sea. A hush settled over the gathering, not born of command, but of shared breath. A recognition that departure was no longer a thought, but an unfolding, and the stillness deepened as if the very night held its breath to watch. The first boat slid into the water, its bow cutting softly into the ripples, the wood groaning faintly as if remembering the forest from which it had come. And the sound carried through the air like an ancient note held too long to fade. The men climbed aboard with practiced grace, their bodies swaying with the shifting balance of the vessel, their hands steady on ropes and poles. And in that seamless movement, one could see that this leaving was not sudden, but woven into the very rhythm of their lives. Voices rose in song, low and melodic, not sung for the ears of those left behind, but for the sea itself, a weaving of tones, meant to soothe the restless waters and to remind the wrestlers that their ancestors had sung the same words to the same waves long before. The tide lifted, dark water curling cool around ankles, knees and thighs, drawing the vessels outward with patient insistence. And the sand fell away beneath the weight of water, as if the land itself were gently loosening its hold. Stars emerged slowly, one by one, scattered at first and then gathering into fields of light that stretched into forever. And though the sailors did not trace constellations on charts, each bright point was known to them as a companion, a silent witness that would travel above them across unmeasured distances. The shore receded in the dim light, its fires shrinking into faint embers glowing between palms, its voices fading into the hush of waves. And in that slow diminishing, the sailors felt the tug of longing, yet did not turn their eyes away. For departure demanded silence more than resistance. The sails caught the breath of night, swelling like living lungs against the dark sky. And the boats leaned into the currents with patient momentum, each movement a blending of wood, wind, and water into a single body that carried human lives across the unknowable expanse. In the distance, the cries of seabirds echoed briefly, their wings white against the starlit dark, circling and calling as if offering both warning and blessing. And their sound faded as the boat slipped farther beyond the reef into waters less certain, more secret. The sailors moved with deliberate calm, their hands tying, loosening, and adjusting with an ease born from years of inherited practice, their eyes shifting between the surface of the sea and the pattern of stars above, reading signs no parchment could ever capture. The ocean breathed around them, its vast surface rolling with a rhythm older than memory, each swell lifting and lowering the boats like cradles. And though the sailors' hearts tightened with the distance already opening behind them, they yielded to that rhythm as to a mother's embrace. The night deepened fully, its silence vast, yet filled with countless small sounds, the creak of ropes, the slap of water against hulls, the distant hiss of waves on faraway shoals. And within that quiet, the sailors felt both solitude and kinship, as if the sea itself were now their only companion. They did not speak of destination, for the journey was not measured by the certainty of landfall, but by the act of surrendering to the open water. And so their silence held more meaning than words, a silence shared among men who trusted not compasses, but currents. Behind them, the shore became no more than a memory, a faint glow swallowed by horizon. And before them stretched the dark expanse of ocean without map, without measure, vast and waiting, holding within its depths both danger and discovery, both loss and endless possibility. The forgotten sailors, their names already dissolving into the rhythm of the tide, sat steady in their vessels with the wind at their backs and the stars above them, carried onward into waters no chart had ever drawn, trusting only the song of waves and the patience of night. The morning arrived softly, the horizon brushed in pale apricot and muted gold, and the sailors rose from the gentle sway of their vessels, feeling the cool spray of salt water kiss their skin, each droplet a delicate reminder of the vastness surrounding them. The sea stretched outward in every direction, a quiet expanse of rippling turquoise that shimmered beneath the rising sun. And the sailors' hands rested lightly upon oars worn smooth by years of travel, their muscles attuned to the slow, rhythmic pull of water beneath the hulls. The wind moved with tender insistence, brushing hair against foreheads, slipping into sleeves, carrying the sharp tang of salt and the faint sweetness of distant reefs. And every inhalation reminded them of the wide world waiting beyond the horizon, unseen yet quietly present. Waves rolled in gentle undulations, their crests foaming white before settling back into calm, and the sailors watched closely, tracing the subtle patterns across the water, feeling the pulse of the ocean beneath them as if it whispered secrets of currents and hidden pathways. Seabirds wheeled overhead, their wings catching sunlight and glinting like scattered gold, their calls piercing the quiet with occasional brightness. And the sailors followed their flight with eyes both searching and patient, understanding that these creatures alone could guide them in ways maps and compasses never could. The scent of wet wood rose from the boats, mingling with the briny air. And the sailors inhaled deeply, letting the familiar texture of the vessels beneath their hands and the sound of water lapping at holes soothe the tension of uncharted seas and endless hours. Salt clung to their skin, a fine layer of crystallized memory, and when they dipped fingers into the sea, it tasted of distance. Of storms endured and calms surrendered to. The water cool and full of the subtle pulse of life hidden beneath its surface. Each sailor found a rhythm in the oar, the motion flowing through shoulders and arms. Through spine and fingers, a quiet connection to the living sea, as if each stroke both followed and shaped the current, threading them into the endless fabric of water stretching far beyond sight. A dolphin broke the surface nearby, arcing gracefully through the waves, its sleek body catching sunlight in fleeting ribbons of silver. And the sailors paused, their breaths caught in a shared hush, marveling at the sudden presence of life that mirrored their own quiet curiosity. The sky above shifted subtly, clouds drifting in slow patterns, some thin and wispy, others heavy with hidden rain. And the sailors' eyes traced the shapes, imagining them as guardians of the day, their motion a gentle promise of change and continuity across the ocean. The temperature rose gradually as the sun climbed, warming shoulders and backs. And the sailors felt the contrast of cool sea spray against the heat of skin, a tactile reminder of the delicate balance between water and light, wind and flesh, effort and surrender. Small fish darted beneath the boats, their silvery forms catching reflections and refracting them into scattered patterns on the hulls. And the sailors leaned lightly over the edges, fingers brushing the waves, feeling the brief touch of movement that reminded them of unseen worlds beneath the surface. Occasionally, a shadow passed beneath the water, long and silent, and the sailors glimpsed it without alarm, understanding that the ocean's pulse included countless beings, some known, some mysterious, each playing a quiet part in the great rhythm of waves. The smell of brine deepened as morning stretched, mingling with faint hints of seaweed and sun-warmed driftwood, and the sailors breathed slowly, letting the richness of the ocean seep into them, grounding their minds and bodies in the present, even as the horizon invited thought of distant shores. They spoke little, voices hushed, for the sound of oars and the whisper of water provided sufficient conversation. And in that silence, they discovered a harmony between each other, a shared awareness of the endless stretch of waves and the patience required to traverse them. The currents shifted subtly, pulling boats slightly sideways. It's a gentle reminder that the ocean moved on its own will, and the sailors adjusted without strain, hands and bodies attuned to these imperceptible changes, letting themselves be guided by intuition as much as by observation. As midday approached, the sun climbed higher, its reflection scattering across water in endless flickers, and the sailors shielded their eyes occasionally, allowing the brightness to burn gently upon vision, filling their minds with patterns that echoed the rippling waves beneath the hulls. They tasted the salt again, letting it linger on lips and tongue, a tangible connection to the sea's immensity. And each swallow carried memory. The taste of storms survived. Nights endured under starlit skies, and the quiet joy of the first glimpses of distant horizons unseen by any compass. The boats bobbed in gentle harmony, the water rising and falling beneath them in a pulse that seemed to breathe in time with their own hearts. And the sailors leaned into the rhythm, letting it carry them, steady and unwavering, across the quiet expanse of ocean. Cloud shadows slid across the waves, altering the color of water in subtle swaths of dark and light. And the sailors' eyes followed these transient patches, tracing their movement with a patience that felt almost sacred, as though watching the sun's play upon water were a form of prayer. Occasionally, one sailor would pause, hands resting on oar, to gaze across the vast blue, seeing nothing but water, sky, and the faint curvature of distant waves. And in these pauses, they felt the quiet ache of isolation softened by the embrace of boundless beauty. The wind rose slightly in the afternoon, brushing faces and ruffling hair, carrying the sound of waves further, filling the sailors' ears with a richer music, a layering of soft rush, subtle creak of timber, and the occasional cry of far-off gulls calling to the horizon. A gentle swell lifted the boats, tipping them softly before they settled again, and the sailors laughed quietly at the rhythm, a sound carried lightly across the waves, their bodies moving in harmony with the undulations, as if the ocean itself danced with them in welcome. In moments of stillness, the water became like glass, reflecting the sky above and the scattered clouds in perfect mirror. And the sailors lingered in these moments, seeing themselves and the sea entwined. Two currents meeting briefly before continuing on separate journeys. Evening approached, the sun dipping lower, warming the clouds with amber, violet, and rose. And the sailors turned toward the horizon with renewed attention, tracing the edge of water where sky met sea. A line that promised discovery, patience, and the subtle whisper of something just beyond sight. The breeze softened as the light changed, carrying faint hints of distant reefs. Perhaps islands unseen, the scent mingling with salt and subtle greenery, and the sailors let their hands rest lightly on oars, feeling the gentle tug of currents toward something unknown yet deeply familiar. As stars began to glimmer faintly overhead, the water reflected the first points of light, and the sailors paused once more, leaning back in their boats, breathing in rhythm with the subtle rise and fall of waves, their bodies and minds merging with the endless motion of sea and sky. Sleep found them eventually in gentle intervals, naps cradled by rocking boats, dreams filled with distant lands, white sands, and forests whispered in wind. And the sailors rested knowing that tomorrow would bring continuation of this quiet rhythm, the journey forward, unbroken by haste or fear. And so the forgotten sailors moved through the day, carried by currents and intuition, touched by sun and wind, soothed by water and sky, learning the language of open sea without compass or map, trusting the pulse of waves as guide and companion, and letting the ocean itself teach them the art of presence. The morning arrived in gentle hues of pearl and rose, washing across the surface of the endless sea. And the sailors rose from their resting places on the swaying vessels, feeling the rhythm of waves beneath their bodies, as though the ocean itself breathed with them. A thin mist hovered above the water, cool and delicate, clinging to skin and hair, and they inhaled it deeply, tasting the salt and the freshness of early light, allowing the sea's quiet pulse to seep into their senses and slow the mind. The boats floated lightly on the swell, rising and falling with the rhythm of hidden currents, and the sailors' hands moved instinctively, adjusting oars and ropes with a practiced tenderness, their muscles remembering motions long honed by repetition and intuition. Seagulls wheeled above, their cries bright against the soft gray of mist and morning sky, and the sailors watched, noting how wings cut the air, how feathers caught sunlight, how effortless movement could carry such presence, leaving only shadow and sound behind. The wind carried scents of far-off reefs, distant shorelines, hints of vegetation and wood smoke, and they breathed slowly, letting the fragrances layer with salt and spray, each inhalation folding memory and place into the present, a gentle map traced through sensation rather than mark or compass. Small fish glittered beneath the surface, darting in schools that shifted like liquid silver, and the sailors leaned over the edges, feeling the cool water lap at their hands and imagining currents beneath the hulls. A world alive with unseen life guiding their path in quiet, imperceptible ways. Their shadows stretched long upon the water as the sun climbed higher, touching every swell and ripple with gold, and the sailors let their eyes linger, tracing the reflection of sky and self, noticing the fluidity of light and wave, the constant dialogue between earth, sea, and air. Occasionally, a dolphin broke the surface, sleek body arcing in a glimmering bow, and the sailors paused in silent admiration, feeling a fleeting kinship with the creature, a recognition of shared movement. a brief understanding that the rhythm of life extended beyond human design. The sea spoke softly, its voice a chorus of lapping waves, distant crests, and the occasional murmur of deep currents unseen, and the sailors listened, letting its sound guide their hearts, their hands, their very pulse, attuned to the slow language of water and wind. Their oars traced arcs in the quiet waves, leaving small, foamy trails that dissolved quickly, and each stroke carried memory of journeys past. Storms endured, and nights spent under stars without guidance. A pattern as much of instinct as it was of intent, woven into the texture of water. Clouds drifted lazily across the sky, some thick and shadowed, others thin and fleeting. And the sailors' eyes followed them, noting their slow movement, the subtle shifts of color and form. The soft play of shadow upon water, a constant reminder of change, balanced with quiet continuity. The scent of brine deepened with the rising sun, mingling with faint traces of algae and distant wood, and the sailors let it fill their lungs. Feeling the ocean's presence not as a force to conquer, but as a companion that carried both challenge and comfort, mystery and familiarity. At times, they stopped rowing, letting the boats drift, feeling the gentle tug of currents beneath and around them, sensing the invisible pull of deep water that guided movement without command. A patient hand folded into every swell, every fold, every turn of the tide. They noticed the faintest disturbances in the water. Small shadows moving beneath the surface, a flash of silver, a ripple that hinted at creatures unseen. And the sailors accepted them as companions on the journey. Silent, mysterious part of the unseen choreography that sustained the ocean. The sun climbed steadily, warming skin and brightening waves. And the sailors felt the tactile sensation of heat mingled with salt, the contrast of sun on shoulders and the cool spray upon arms. Each moment layering itself into memory as a mosaic of experience, sensation, and place. A faint line of land appeared on the horizon, misted and soft. Yet the sailors did not quicken their pace, for the water carried them in its own rhythm, teaching patience through gentle insistence, reminding them that arrival is measured not by sight alone, but by harmony with the world around. Waves rose slightly as a current shifted, rocking the vessels gently, and the sailors adjusted, letting the motion pass through spine and arms, absorbing its energy without strain, feeling both weight and release. The ocean a living teacher in balance and surrender. They tasted the salt on their lips and the coolness of water on fingertips, feeling the textures of journey manifest in body as well as mind. Each sensation an affirmation of presence, each breath an acknowledgement of the fragile, infinite world that cradled them across distances unseen. Seabirds returned at intervals, calling across the horizon in high, piercing notes, their flight patterns weaving above and through the sailor's awareness. An aerial ballet that mirrored the movement of waves below, connecting sky, sea, and human observer in quiet, unspoken rhythm. The sailors adjusted sails and oars with subtle gestures, communicating in ways beyond speech. Their bodies fluent in the language of touch and balance, of wind and water, of patience and anticipation. A dialogue that unfolded with each stroke and turn along the endless surface. By afternoon, the sun cast the sea in hues of sapphire and emerald, the waves reflecting clouds in a soft distortion. And the sailors moved like shadows upon the water, their presence fleeting and harmonious, blending into the vastness without disrupting its slow, eternal pattern. They rested intermittently, lying on boards or leaning against the edges of hulls, letting the swell cradle them, listening to water and wind, tasting the mingling fragrances of sea, spray, and sunlight, and allowing their minds to drift into the kind of quiet reflection that carries both history and hope. A pod of dolphins passed nearby, slicing through the surface with ease, their sleek forms and sudden movements captivating the sailors' attention. And they watched with measured admiration, feeling for a moment that the creatures shared the secret language of currents, a knowledge older than sight or maps. Shadows lengthened as the sun declined, casting gold across rippling water, and the sailors paused to take it in, noticing the interplay of light and wave, the subtle darkening beneath moving clouds. The infinite complexity of surfaces touched by sun, all teaching patience and reverence for the small details of movement. The horizon deepened to lilac and rose, and the sailors leaned back to watch, breathing in rhythm with the gentle rise and fall of hulls on water, feeling the slow intimacy of day giving way to night, the promise of stars, the quiet reassurance of the ocean's vast embrace. They drifted into evening with minimal movement, their bodies rocking in tandem with the tides, hands lightly brushing water as it passed, tasting salt on lips, inhaling its scent, letting the long day settle into muscle and mind. A slow, flowing meditation on travel, time, and presence. Night fell, stars emerging softly, reflected on darkened water, and the sailors drifted into sleep, dreams filled with distant lands. The scent of forests and fire, the texture of sand and stone, and the gentle knowledge that the ocean itself held them in quiet motion, carrying them toward what lay beyond the horizon. Morning unfolded in a haze of silver and pale amber, soft light spilling across the gentle swells, and the sailors rose, their bodies still heavy with rest, yet attuned to the subtle rocking of their boats. Feeling the pulse of the sea beneath them, mist hovered above the waves, delicate and cool, wrapping the vessels in a quiet cloak that muted sound and softened edges, and the sailors inhaled deeply, tasting salt and moisture mingled with a faint hint of distant reefs, letting the fog carry them forward. The air was damp and sweet with hidden life, the faint trace of seaweed and blooming coastal flowers drifting across the bow, and each inhalation seemed to weave the scent into memory, grounding them in the liminal space between water and land, known and unknown. Waves rose and fell in measured rhythm, carrying boats gently with the current, and the sailors felt the tactile rhythm in every limb, each movement a quiet dialogue with the ocean, their hands and feet guided by intuition more than sight, responding to whispers of depth beneath the hulls. Seabirds called from distant heights, their cries slicing through mist, and the sailors' eyes followed their flight, noting how the wings cut air and how effortlessly motion could carry presence. Sensing that these creatures were a subtle compass, guiding without maps or charts. The fog rolled slowly, curling around hulls and splashing onto skin with a faint chill, and the sailors adjusted their sleeves, feeling the cool wetness settle into hair and fabric, the tactile sensation anchoring them in the moment, even as the horizon remained blurred and mysterious. Occasionally, a wave revealed the dark curve of a hidden shadow below, a fleeting glimpse of life moving silently beneath the surface. And the sailors watched, knowing the ocean held countless stories unseen, and that every ripple, every swell, was part of a vast and patient world. Hands rested lightly on oars, following the swell, the rhythm of muscle against water both comforting and grounding. And the sailors moved in quiet synchrony, their motions attuned to each other, to the vessels, and to the ocean's endless pulse, a conversation without words carried through touch and flow. The scent of wet timber and salt mingled with sea foam rising from small breaking waves, and they breathed it in, letting the aroma saturate body and memory. The tactile awareness of boat, rope, and/or reinforcing a quiet mastery of movement born not of tools, but of observation and intuition. Sunlight filtered through mist in slow, fragmented streams, scattering across waves in glimmering patches. And the sailors' eyes traced the patterns, marveling at the delicate interplay of light, water, and shadow, feeling the ephemeral beauty as if it were a language meant only for those who moved slowly enough to perceive. Occasionally, the water's surface would tremble beneath a passing current, and the sailors felt the subtle pull beneath their hulls, adjusting instinctively, a small dance with unseen forces. the sense of touch bridging the gap between human presence and the immense sentient movement of the ocean itself. The temperature rose gradually as the mist thinned, sunlight warming shoulders and backs, mingling with the cool spray of sea. And each sailor felt the contrasting sensations, letting them merge into a meditative awareness of body and environment, a seamless connection between self and world. A pod of dolphins surfaced nearby, sleek and glimmering, leaping gracefully through mist and sunlight, and the sailors paused to watch, hands resting on oars, feeling the shared rhythm of motion and water. A fleeting kinship with creatures whose presence felt both playful and profoundly knowing. Clouds drifted lazily overhead, some thick and shadowed, others thin and translucent. And the sailors noted the gentle change of light, the subtle shaping of sky, the soft music of wind through sails and rigging, each element contributing to a world alive with quiet movement and patient observation. The sea offered glimpses of deeper blues and greens beneath translucent swells, and the sailors peered into the water, seeing the hint of currents and shadowed forms, understanding that the ocean held a layered history in every ripple, a memory of journeys, storms, and creatures long past and yet still present. The horizon remained hazy, mist clinging to the distance in soft gray, and the sailors accepted its obscurity, feeling no urgency, no need to arrive, knowing that discovery existed in the steady passage through air and water, the gentle acquisition of knowledge through observation, touch, and presence. Small fish darted beneath the hulls, scattering and reforming like liquid silver, and the sailors leaned lightly over the edges, fingertips grazing the surface, feeling the fleeting coolness and the quicksilver motion beneath, a reminder that the ocean's mysteries were infinite and ever-moving, yet intimately accessible. They paused occasionally, letting the boats drift, feeling the tug of currents unseen, the sway of water beneath, the motion of wind above. Sensing the ocean's subtle instructions, a guidance rooted not in tools but in attentiveness, patience, and the willingness to yield to rhythm rather than resist it. The sun climbed higher, scattering the mist and painting soft ribbons of light across the waves, and the sailors' eyes followed the shifting patterns, letting the interplay of brightness and shadow guide awareness, a visual meditation intertwined with the tactile knowledge of oars, hull, and swell. Shadows lengthened slowly as afternoon approached, softening the colors of water and mist, and the sailors leaned back briefly, inhaling deeply, tasting the salt and faint vegetal scent of distant shores, allowing senses to record memory in layers of smell, touch, sight, and sound. The wind shifted gently, brushing faces and clothing, carrying the faint tang of hidden forests and sun-warmed stones. And the sailors adjusted sails and posture in subtle response, feeling the ocean and air as co-conspirators, partners in movement and understanding that could not be forced but only observed and respected. The horizon hinted at possible land, a suggestion of green beneath the mist. Yet the sailors continued slowly, resisting haste, letting the suggestion remain a quiet thought, not a command, trusting instead the rhythm of water and wind, the tactile intelligence of oars and hull, and the unspoken wisdom of the sea. Evening approached, and the sun began its descent, casting long, muted reflections across rippling water, bathing everything in soft amber and rose, and the sailors allowed themselves to pause, arms resting lightly, faces lifted to the diminishing light, hearts attuned to the ocean's patient cadence. Birds returned to the surface, gliding low over waves, wings extended, their reflections tracing mirrored patterns in the water, and the sailors observed them quietly, noting the ease of flight, the effortless presence, and imagining a life guided by instinct, observation, and intimate knowledge of surroundings. The day faded, the mist retreating into memory, and the sailors found small moments of rest, leaning against hulls or sitting quietly on boards, eyes tracing gentle ripples and fleeting glimmers, ears tuned to the harmony of wind, water, and distant calls. letting awareness settle into the rhythm of the day's passage. As darkness began to gather, stars shimmered faintly through thinning mist, reflected in the subtle undulations of water, and the sailors felt the slow quiet of night enfolding them, their bodies still rocking with the swell, their minds carrying the sensory imprint of hours spent attuned to wind, wave, and horizon. They drifted toward sleep in gentle intervals, dreams filled with faint shapes of distant islands, unseen reefs, and forests whispering through wind. The sensation of water brushing skin, of sun warming shoulders, of birds guiding flight and currents guiding hull, all layered into the quiet tapestry of memory. And in that soft descent into night, with horizon blurred, waves steady, and the ocean holding them in gentle motion, the sailors learned once more that patience, observation, and subtlety were the true maps. That presence and perception charted paths beyond compass or star. The morning arrived softly, brushed in pale gold and the faintest pink, and the sailors rose from the gentle rocking of their vessels, letting the motion of the water carry them as their hands instinctively settled on oars, attuned to the subtle undulations beneath. Mist lingered over the waves in delicate veils, cool against skin and hair, carrying the faint scent of salt and distant vegetation. And the sailors inhaled slowly, letting the subtle mingling of air and water awaken senses dulled by night and attune them to the rhythm of the sea. The boats rocked gently on swells that rose and fell like measured breathing, and the sailors moved with quiet purpose, letting muscles remember motions honed over countless days. Each stroke of the oar, a gentle conversation with currents invisible but deeply understood. Seabirds wheeled overhead, their cries sharp yet distant, wings slicing through the soft morning light, and the sailors' eyes followed them patiently, noting the effortless sweep of feathers and the way creatures of air could navigate vastness without map or compass, trusting instinct and rhythm. The scent of damp wood rose from hulls and ropes, mingling with brine and the faint sweetness of seaweed, and the sailors breathed deeply, tasting the subtle, layered fragrance of the ocean, letting memory and presence fold into one, the past and present converging in every inhalation. Small fish darted beneath the surface, shimmering like liquid silver, and the sailors leaned lightly over the edges, fingertips brushing water, feeling coolness and motion, and imagining the hidden life of currents beneath, a world moving in silent, intricate patterns beyond sight. The sun climbed gradually, scattering light across gentle waves in golden flickers, and the sailors let their eyes follow the reflections, observing the soft, fleeting interplay of water and sky, letting patterns of brightness and shadow guide awareness as much as intuition guided oars. Occasionally, a dolphin arced above the surface, sleek body glinting with the morning light, and the sailors paused in quiet admiration, feeling kinship with the creature, sensing the shared knowledge of movement through water, the effortless grace born of living in harmony with the sea's pulse. The wind shifted, brushing faces and hair, soft yet insistent, carrying distant fragrances of hidden shores and sun-warmed sand. And the sailors adjusted sails and posture without urgency, letting themselves be guided by sensation and observation. The subtleties of motion teaching patience beyond any chart or compass. Waves rose in gentle, measured rhythm, rolling and folding over each other in a slow, timeless dance. And the sailors felt the swell beneath hulls, the rise and fall in spine and arms, the tactile language of water communicating currents, depth, and direction in a form older than any map. The horizon remained hazy, a soft suggestion of distance rather than certainty. And the sailors accepted the ambiguity, feeling no need to pierce it with haste, trusting instead the slow unfolding of the day. The subtle lessons whispered by wind, wave, and the pulse of the ocean itself. Sunlight glimmered through thin clouds, scattering in ribbons across rippling water, and the sailors' eyes traced the patterns, letting the interplay of light, reflection, and shadow become a gentle meditation, each flicker a note in the quiet music of presence and observation that filled the morning. The air carried the faintest trace of wood smoke, curling lazily from distant, unseen islands, mingling with salt and brine, and the sailors inhaled, imagining meals shared, fires tended, hands held, and lives quietly lived. The scent, a subtle connection to human presence, carried across the water. Hands moved instinctively on oars, the rhythm of motion both meditative and precise, a dialogue between sailor and sea, hull and wave, wind and sail. And in each stroke was memory of past journeys, the quiet knowledge of currents, and the gentle trust that the water would carry them forward. Clouds drifted lazily above, shifting in shape and hue, and the sailors watched the play of light, the subtle shadows cast upon swells, the rhythm of slow movement that mirrored their own passage, noting that beauty and navigation were inseparable. Both found in observation and patient attention to the world. The tide brought small, scattered waves to lap against hulls, foaming white and dissolving softly into green and blue. And the sailors' hands followed the rhythm of swell, adjusting grip and angle, absorbing motion and learning from it, the tactile language of water, a guide subtler and more intimate than any compass needle. Temperature shifted gently as sun and wind combined, warmth on skin mingling with cool spray, and the sailors closed their eyes briefly, letting sensations register, muscles remembering, lungs filling with air, heavy with salt and light, allowing awareness to settle into the quiet harmony of body, mind, and sea. Occasionally, shadows moved beneath the water, long shapes slipping silently through the deep, and the sailors watched without alarm, feeling the presence of life beyond perception, a silent chorus of motion that carried continuity, history, and quiet companionship in the vast, open expanse. The horizon hinted at distant land, faint shapes of green softened by air and light. Yet the sailors did not hasten, letting the suggestion remain an invitation rather than a command, trusting the slow lessons of wind, water, and wave, of oar and hull, that guided motion more reliably than sight alone. Evening approached, and the sun dipped lower, casting long, amber streaks across gentle swells, bathing water and sailors in a quiet, golden warmth. And the air softened, carrying hints of mist and faint fragrances of vegetation. The ocean itself settling into a calm, patient rhythm. Birds returned to glide low over the water, wings extended, reflections mirrored in soft undulations. And the sailors observed quietly, noting effortless motion, patterns of navigation instinctive yet precise, the subtle guidance of currents mirrored in flight. Each creature a companion in the endless choreography of air and sea. The day began to fade into soft twilight, waves rolling and lapping in harmony with the wind's gentle sigh. And the sailors allowed bodies to rest against hulls, hands tracing familiar textures of rope and wood, eyes following ripples and shifting reflections, ears attuned to the quiet music of movement. Stars emerged slowly, reflected in water like faint silver threads, and the sailors felt the gentle pull of night, a settling of motion, a quiet invitation to pause, breathe, and absorb the layered impressions of day, the subtle record of light, sound, touch, and memory stored within each movement. They drifted in gentle intervals toward sleep, dreams filled with glimpses of distant islands, reefs, and forests whispered by wind and current. The tactile sensation of water on skin, salt on lips, warmth of sun fading into the cool evening, and the subtle intimacy of traveling with an ocean that knew them. And so the forgotten sailors continued, carried by the slow rhythm of tides and intuition, hands and hearts attuned to water and wind, finding maps in sensation and memory rather than tools, letting each day fold quietly into the next, and trusting the ocean itself to carry them toward horizons yet unseen. Morning arrived quietly, the horizon a gentle gradient of peach and lavender, and the sailors rose slowly with the sway of their vessels, letting the cool spray of salt water brush against cheeks and arms as if the sea itself whispered a soft invitation to wake. Mist hung in the air, thin and almost ethereal, clinging to hair and clothing, carrying the faint scent of seaweed, distant forests, and the soft mineral tang of hidden reefs, and the sailors inhaled slowly, letting each breath anchor them to the rhythm of water and wind. The surface of the sea rippled in gentle pulses, lifting and lowering hulls in a slow, hypnotic cadence. And the sailors adjusted their hands and feet, moving with the swell, letting muscles remember motion honed over countless hours, every stroke and shift a subtle conversation with currents unseen. Seabirds wheeled above, their calls echoing across the soft light, wings glinting in gold and silver reflections, and the sailors observed without haste, noting how effortlessly motion could carry presence, how instinct guided flight, and how the invisible forces of wind and wave seemed to speak in a language older than memory. Sunlight filtered through thinning clouds, scattering in warm threads across the undulating water, and the sailors' eyes traced the shifting reflections, noticing subtle changes of color and pattern, letting light guide perception as much as intuition, and feeling a quiet joy in the slow beauty of a world moving without urgency. The smell of salt and brine deepened as morning progressed, mingling with the faint sweetness of distant reefs and the earthy trace of submerged vegetation. And the sailors breathed in the layered fragrance, allowing it to fold into memory, body, and mind, creating a tactile map more precise than any compass. Small fish darted beneath the surface, silver flashes moving in synchronized patterns, and the sailors leaned lightly over the edges, feeling the cool touch of water against fingers, imagining the hidden network of life beneath them, and understanding that every ripple, every shadow, was a subtle guide in the open expanse. Occasionally, a dolphin arched above the waves, sleek and luminous, and the sailors paused, hearts catching in quiet awe, feeling the kinship of movement, the shared intimacy of knowing currents and following rhythm, marveling at the ease of a creature that lived entirely in conversation with water and wind. The wind shifted gently, brushing across faces and arms, filling sails with subtle insistence, and the sailors adjusted posture and grip in response, learning its soft instructions, feeling how unseen forces could guide the vessels, and understanding that the world itself was patient, revealing knowledge to those willing to observe. Waves rolled and folded upon each other, a slow, ceaseless dance, and the sailors' hands traced arcs in water, oars dipping rhythmically into swells, feeling the pulse beneath hulls, sensing depth, current, and resistance. A quiet dialogue that required no words but demanded full attention and presence. Clouds drifted lazily overhead, shadows sliding over water. Subtle changes of color and texture, and the sailors watched, tracing the forms with gentle patience, noting that patterns in sky mirrored movement in water, that rhythm and shape were guides of perception, and that observation itself was a form of understanding. The temperature rose gradually as sunlight touched skin, mingling warmth with the cool spray of sea, and sailors closed eyes briefly to absorb sensation, letting body and mind register layers of heat, moisture, and motion, a delicate meditation on the interplay between sun, wind, and water. Shadows of creatures passed beneath the boats, long and silent, and sailors observed without alarm, feeling the invisible presence of life in currents, the delicate intimacy of the sea's hidden inhabitants, and the subtle reminder that the ocean carried history, memory, and countless silent companions in every fold of wave. The horizon suggested distant land, a faint green blur softened by humidity and light. Yet the sailors did not hurry, letting the suggestion remain an invitation, trusting the gentle instructions of wave, wind, and current, knowing that presence and attention were truer guides than eyes or compass ever could be. Sunlight broke fully through clouds, scattering diamonds across ripples, and the sailors followed the fleeting sparkles, letting brightness guide perception, while oars moved in gentle, repeated arcs. A choreography of human effort and oceanic patience, each motion steeped in both necessity and quiet grace. The scent of wood, salt, and faint distant fire rose from boats and sea alike. Mingling with air, and sailors inhaled memories of other journeys, other islands, other quiet mornings folded into perception, creating a layered sense of navigation through experience rather than chart, touch rather than instruction. Hands moved instinctively on oars, following swell and current. The rhythm both meditative and practical, a dialogue between body, vessel, and water, each motion carrying the memory of previous days. The knowledge of waves, and the quiet awareness that every subtle adjustment was a continuation of the ocean's long conversation. Clouds continued to drift, forming new shapes, softening and sharpening. And the sailor's eyes traced them, recognizing impermanence, subtle change, the necessity of attention, and the beauty in quiet observation. Noting that the sky, the water, and their own presence were entwined in a continuous, flowing harmony. The tide shifted slightly, small swells lapping at hulls, foaming briefly. And sailors felt the pull beneath them, subtle and insistent, adjusting hands and posture. Letting tactile instruction guide direction and movement, absorbing lessons not written in maps, but flowing invisibly through each fold and swell. Temperature, light, and motion shifted with the afternoon sun, warmth blending with spray and the faint tang of vegetation, and sailors closed eyes to feel the world fully, letting sensation become knowledge, and knowledge folds seamlessly into presence, the body memorizing rhythm and nuance in a language beyond speech. Occasionally, distant shadows moved underwater, hints of creatures unseen yet present, and sailors watched quietly, noting subtle changes in wave and light, a reminder that the ocean was layered and alive. That guidance existed in observation, patience, and intuition, and that each being played a silent role in the rhythm of passage. The horizon softened toward evening, the sun casting long streaks of amber and rose across gentle waves, and the sailors paused, resting hands lightly on oars. Breathing deeply, feeling the tactile history of the day etched in muscles, skin, and memory, and allowing the ocean's calm to fold them into its quiet continuity. Birds returned to glide low over water, reflections mirrored in gentle ripples, wings extended in effortless flight, and the sailors observed silently, noting instinctive precision and harmony with wind. Sensing in these creatures a reflection of their own need to move with awareness, presence, and quiet respect for forces larger than themselves. Twilight deepened, the water reflecting faint silver and violet hues, and the sailors leaned back in quiet contemplation, letting oars rest, feeling the motion of swells, listening to soft whispers of wind and water, and tasting salt on lips, absorbing the layered textures of day as memory, rhythm, and understanding. Night arrived slowly, stars emerging faintly, mirrored in darkened water, and sailors drifted into gentle rest, dreams filled with distant forests, hidden islands, and the subtle motion of water on skin, carrying lessons learned from tides, winds, and currents, an intimate education imparted without instruction, wholly experienced. And so the sailors moved through day into night, guided not by compass or map, but by intuition, rhythm, and sensory awareness, learning the language of wind and wave, letting observation, patience, and subtlety carry them toward horizons yet unseen, trusting the ocean as both teacher and companion. The day began in gentle tones of gold and soft gray, the horizon barely distinct where water met sky, and the sailors stirred with the slow rocking of their boats, feeling the subtle tug of currents beneath, as if the sea itself breathed in rhythm with them. Mist hovered faintly above the water, cool and delicate, brushing skin and hair, carrying the layered scent of salt, distant reefs, and faint greenery from hidden islands, and the sailors inhaled slowly, letting the aroma anchor them in the quiet intimacy of movement and presence. The ocean rose and fell in gentle swells, lifting hulls with measured grace, and the sailors moved in harmony with the rhythm, their hands and feet instinctively adjusting oars and lines, muscles remembering the subtle dialogue of touch and resistance, a conversation older than any words or charts. Seabirds drifted above, wings catching fleeting sunlight, their calls echoing softly across the water, and the sailors observed without haste, noting how flight mirrored the gentle undulation of waves, how instinct and rhythm guided movement, and how the smallest gestures could carry meaning across vast spaces. Sunlight began to scatter in thin, golden streams across the undulating surface, reflecting patterns that shifted with every wave. And the sailors' eyes followed the slow dance of light, tracing reflections and shimmer, letting visual perception merge with tactile experience to form a map of presence rather than location. The smell of brine deepened as the tide rose, mingling with faint traces of vegetation and distant fire smoke, and sailors breathed deeply, feeling the layering of memory and sensation, letting each inhalation fold history into the present, sensing the world through body as much as through sight. Occasionally, schools of small fish passed beneath the hulls, silver flashes darting in coordinated motion, and sailors leaned lightly over the edges, fingertips brushing the water, feeling both its coolness and the fleeting energy of life beneath, understanding that currents carried guidance as subtly as any star or compass. A lone dolphin arced across the surface, sleek body glimmering in sunlight, and the sailors paused to watch, the sight connecting them to motion, to rhythm, to the ease of existence attuned entirely to the ocean's ebb and flow. A reminder of silent companionship and shared understanding without words. Wind shifted softly across faces and shoulders, carrying hints of unseen shores, sun-warmed stones, and faint forest scents, and the sailors adjusted sails and posture, learning from its subtle messages, feeling that navigation was as much about yielding and observing as it was about effort and direction. Waves rolled slowly, folding upon one another in quiet repetition, and the sailors' hands followed their rhythm, oars dipping in arcs that mirrored the undulation, the motion-absorbing knowledge of depth, current, and resistance, a tactile education in harmony with forces far larger than themselves. Clouds drifted lazily across the sky, shadowing the water in shifting patches, and sailors watched the gentle play of light and shape, recognizing that impermanence and pattern were as informative as fixed points. That observation and patience were key to understanding the subtle cues of sky, water, and wind. The sun climbed higher, warming shoulders and arms while the spray of water remained cool against skin, and the sailors paused briefly, letting sensations register fully, letting awareness settle into the combined rhythm of warmth, moisture, motion, and reflection, feeling the day's quiet lesson flow through body and mind. Shadows shifted beneath hulls, hints of life unseen, long shapes moving silently through currents, and sailors observed without disturbance, sensing the presence of hidden companions, learning that the ocean held both history and living movement, that every ripple and swell carried guidance for those patient enough to notice. The horizon offered faint hints of distant land, softened by heat and light. Yet sailors did not quicken, letting the suggestion remain a gentle invitation rather than a command. Trusting in the subtle lessons of wind, wave, and observation, understanding that passage was measured in awareness, not distance. Sunlight glinted across ripples, scattering diamonds of light that shifted with every swell, and sailors' eyes traced these fleeting sparkles, letting brightness guide perception while hands moved instinctively on oars, each motion both practical and meditative, merging body, memory, and rhythm into a seamless whole. The air carried faint whispers of distant forests, salt and sun-baked stone, and sailors inhaled deeply, allowing memory to fold into perception, creating a layered understanding of place, distance, and passage that required no instruments. Only presence, patience, and quiet attention to sensation and movement. Hands moved instinctively on oars, repeating patterns learned through days and weeks. Each stroke a conversation between sailor and seal, hull and wave, wind and sail. Every gesture carrying knowledge of prior journeys, intuition honed through repetition, and trust in the subtle guidance of water beneath them. Clouds continued their slow migration, softening and sharpening as light shifted, and sailors' eyes traced shapes, recognizing impermanence, subtlety, and change. Seeing in sky and water reflections of their own rhythm, understanding that awareness itself was a guide, a map, and a teacher all at once. Tides shifted gradually, small waves lapping at hulls, foaming and dissolving softly, and sailors adjusted in response, letting tactile feedback guide direction and motion. Understanding that the ocean spoke in subtle pressure, pull, and rhythm, a language comprehensible to those willing to listen with body and mind alike. Temperature rose and fell in concert with sun and spray, warmth mingling with cool mist, and sailors closed eyes briefly to absorb sensation fully. Letting touch, sight, and breath merge into perception, a quiet meditation on interconnectedness. Learning the language of ocean, wind, and self simultaneously. Occasionally, faint shadows of creatures moved beneath the surface, reminders of life unseen yet present, and sailors watched patiently, noting the subtle interplay of motion and light. The constant presence of companions hidden within the rhythm of water, a quiet reassurance of continuity and shared passage. The horizon softened as afternoon gave way to evening. Sunlight stretched in long, golden reflections across gentle waves, and sailors paused to rest hands lightly on oars, tasting salt on lips, inhaling layered scents of sea and distant land, absorbing memory and sensation as much as sight and motion. Birds returned to glide low over water, mirrored in gentle ripples, wings extended, their effortless flight reflecting the rhythm of wave and wind. And sailors observed silently, feeling kinship in motion and presence, understanding that guidance and navigation often came from observation, patience, and subtle attunement rather than tools. Twilight deepened, the sky casting violet and silver over the water, and sailors leaned back in quiet contemplation, letting oars rest, absorbing the layered textures of the day, the gentle rise and fall of hulls, the smell of salt and faint vegetation, the touch of wind and spray, and carrying it all into memory. Night arrived softly, stars emerging faintly and reflecting on the water, and sailors drifted toward gentle rest, dreams layered with shapes of distant forests, islands, and the tactile sensation of water on skin, salt on lips, and the slow, infinite motion of the ocean, all forming a quiet, shared rhythm with the sea. And so the sailors continued, carried by currents of wind and water, guided by subtle perception, memory, and intuition, finding maps in sensation and rhythm rather than in compass or star, letting presence, patience, and observation trace paths through the infinite expanse, trusting the ocean as teacher and companion. Morning unfolded in soft gradients of lavender and pale gold, the horizon melting gently into water, and the sailors rose with the sway of their vessels, letting the quiet motion of the sea anchor limbs and thoughts alike, each breath a gentle rhythm in harmony with the world. Mist hovered above the waves, cool and ethereal, settling on hair, skin, and fabric, carrying a mingling of salt, distant foliage, and the faint trace of hidden reefs, and the sailors inhaled slowly, letting the layered fragrance tether them to the subtle pulse of ocean and air. The sea lifted and lowered hulls in measured cadence, and the sailors moved in quiet synchrony, oars slicing gently into the water, hands and feet attuned to subtle resistance, each motion a conversation with currents unseen, a dialogue older than memory, written in rhythm and touch rather than chart or compass. Seabirds drifted above, wings glinting in soft morning light. Their cries echoing across waves, and the sailors watched patiently, noting how effortless flight mirrored gentle undulations, how instinct guided movement, and how the world communicated in patterns of motion visible only to those who observed closely. Sunlight filtered through thin clouds, scattering across swells in golden threads, and the sailors' eyes traced the fleeting reflections, letting visual perception merge with tactile sensation, absorbing the subtle instructions carried by light on water. A quiet, meditative guidance that required patience more than skill. The scent of salt deepened as the tide rose, mingling with hints of vegetation and faint smoke from distant fires. And the sailors inhaled fully, letting memory and perception fold together. Sensing that the sea and air were carriers of quiet stories, every layer of aroma a subtle map of place and time. Schools of fish darted beneath the boats, silver flashes moving in near-perfect synchronicity, and the sailors leaned lightly over edges, fingertips brushing water, feeling the coolness, the motion, and the invisible currents beneath. Understanding that guidance was present in motion as much as in sight, in flow as much as in intention. A dolphin arced gracefully through mist and light, sleek body glimmering, and the sailors paused, hearts catching in gentle wonder, feeling kinship in movement, attuned to rhythm, presence, and effortless motion. As if the creature were a messenger of quiet understanding, teaching navigation through harmony rather than maps. Wind shifted softly across shoulders, carrying whispers of unseen shores, sun-baked rocks, and distant forests, and the sailors adjusted sails and posture with subtle responsiveness, recognizing that navigation was a conversation with forces larger than themselves, an art of listening and yielding rather than commanding. Waves folded over each other in slow, endless cadence, and the sailors' hands traced arcs in water, oars dipping rhythmically into swells, absorbing the tactile lessons of depth, current, and resistance, a quiet education in patience, attentiveness, and the profound trust that each motion required of body and mind. Clouds drifted lazily overhead, shadows sliding across water, and sailors observed the soft interplay of shape and light, seeing in impermanence a guide, in subtle shift a map, man in quiet observation a form of navigation that surpassed charts, compasses, or stars, relying instead on attuned presence. The sun rose higher, warming skin and spray, and sailors closed eyes briefly to absorb sensation, letting heat, moisture, motion, and reflection converge into full awareness, a meditation in rhythm, a quiet absorption of the infinite details of environment, movement, and presence. Shadows glided beneath hulls, elongated and silent, hinting at hidden life below. And sailors observed without alarm, sensing the silent presence of creatures unseen yet known. Understanding that the ocean carried companions, history, and stories beneath every wave. A world alive in subtle, invisible conversation. The horizon offered tentative glimpses of distant land, softened by light and air. Yet sailors did not hurry, letting suggestion remain invitation, trusting subtle lessons from currents, wind, and observation, knowing that passage was measured in awareness and patience rather than in distance or speed. Sunlight danced across ripples, scattering diamonds that shifted with each swell, and sailors' eyes traced the fleeting sparkles, letting brightness guide perception while hands moved in gentle, precise arcs, body, memory, mass, and rhythm converging in quiet understanding of motion, space, and continuity. The air carried faint hints of sun-baked stone, distant vegetation, and lingering salt, and sailors inhaled deeply, allowing memory to fold into sensation, perception to become guidance, creating a layered map of place and movement that required no compass, only careful attention and sensitivity to subtle signals. Hands moved instinctively on oars, repeating patterns learned through long days at sea, each stroke a dialogue between sailor, vessel, and water. every gesture carrying knowledge of currents, swell, and rhythm. Each moment a practice of trust in unseen forces, an intimate lesson in presence and motion. Clouds continued to drift slowly, shapes softening and sharpening as light shifted, and sailors' eyes followed their forms, recognizing impermanence, subtlety, and change, seeing reflections of their own rhythms in sky and water. Understanding that awareness itself provided guidance, a map drawn in observation and patience. Tides shifted imperceptibly, waves lapping at hulls, foaming and dissolving gently, and sailors responded in subtle, quiet adjustments, letting tactile feedback guide motion, learning that the ocean spoke not in words, but in pressure, pull, and rhythm. A language available only to those willing to listen with body and mind. Temperature, light, and motion blended, warmth mingling with cool spray, and sailors closed eyes briefly to absorb sensation fully, letting touch, sight, and breath converge into perception. A quiet meditation on interconnectedness, the rhythm of ocean and self, learning the language of wind and water simultaneously. Occasionally, distant shapes moved beneath the surface, hints of creatures unseen yet present, and sailors watched quietly, noting the interplay of motion and light, the constant presence of companions hidden within water, a subtle reassurance of continuity and shared passage through a vast, patient world. The horizon softened as afternoon became evening. Sunlight stretched in long golden reflections across gentle swells, and sailors rested hands lightly on oars, tasting salt on lips, inhaling layered scents of ocean and land, absorbing memory and sensation as much as sight and motion, letting perception deepen into understanding. Birds returned to glide low over the water, wings mirrored in gentle ripples, effortless flight reflecting the rhythm of waves and wind, and sailors observed in silence, sensing kinship in motion and presence, understanding that guidance often came from observation, patience, and subtle attunement rather than tools or charts. Twilight deepened, the sea shading into violet and silver, and sailors leaned back in quiet reflection, letting oars rest, absorbing textures of the day, the gentle rise and fall of hulls, scent of salt and distant greenery, touch of wind and spray, and the layered memory of motion and rhythm carried within body and mind. Night fell softly, stars emerging faintly above and mirrored in darkened water, and sailors drifted toward gentle rest, dreams weaving distant forests, hidden islands, and tactile sensation of water on skin, salt on lips, and slow, infinite motion of the ocean, forming a quiet, shared rhythm with waves and wind. And so the sailors continued, guided by subtle observation, intuition, and rhythm, finding maps and sensation rather than compass or chart, letting awareness and patience trace paths through the expanse, trusting the ocean to teach, to carry, and to accompany them toward horizons still unseen. The day softened slowly into evening, the horizon glowing in muted gold and gentle violet, and the sailors moved with the rhythm of the swell, letting the slow rise and fall of their vessels guide muscles and breath, feeling the intimate conversation of water and hull. Mist lingered lightly above the waves, cool and whispering against skin and hair, carrying salt and the faint, distant scent of hidden forests and sun-warmed stones. And the sailors inhaled deeply, letting the layered aromas fold into memory and sensation, anchoring presence in the quiet expanses of sea. The ocean undulated in patient waves, lifting hulls with measured grace, and the sailors adjusted hands and posture with instinctive precision, feeling resistance and flow as if the water itself were a gentle teacher. Each movement a lesson in patience, attention, and subtle guidance. Seabirds drifted overhead, wings catching the last gleams of sun, their soft calls traveling across water, and the sailors observed without urgency, noting how effortless flight mirrored the gentle undulations of the sea, how instinct navigated motion, and how subtle perception could trace invisible paths. Sunlight filtered through thinning clouds, scattering across swells in shifting threads of gold and amber. And the sailor's eyes followed patterns of light, letting reflections guide perception as much as intuition, absorbing the quiet instruction of nature's choreography while oars moved in measured fluid rhythm. The scent of brine deepened, mingling with faint traces of vegetation and distant fire. And the sailors inhaled slowly, letting body and mind fold memory into present sensation, sensing that the sea carried both past journeys and unseen possibilities. Each wave a quiet courier of history and subtle guidance. Schools of small fish darted beneath hulls, silver flashes flickering with the rhythm of currents, and the sailors leaned gently over edges, fingers brushing cool water, feeling energy and movement below, understanding that life itself carried messages in patterns, currents, and pulse, and that observation could replace instruments in this vast expanse. A dolphin arced above the surface, sleek and luminous in the fading light. And the sailors paused, breath catching softly, feeling kinship in motion, attuned to the effortless navigation of a being wholly attuned to water. A companion in rhythm and awareness, a living embodiment of knowledge carried in instinct and subtle observation. Wind shifted gently across shoulders and cheeks, carrying whispers of distant shores, sun-warmed stones and unseen forests, and sailors adjusted sails and stance, listening carefully, letting subtle signals shape movement. Learning that guidance was a quiet dialogue with forces larger than themselves, a lesson in yielding, observing, and trusting. Waves rolled in unhurried repetition, folding upon one another, and sailors' hands traced arcs in water, oars dipping in harmony with motion, absorbing lessons of depth, resistance, and current, a tactile education more precise than any compass, demanding patience, presence, and quiet awareness of the intimate language of sea and body. Clouds drifted lazily overhead, shadows gliding across gentle swells, and sailors watched the slow, shifting interplay of shape and light, recognizing impermanence and subtle variation, understanding that awareness, observation, and patience formed a map in their own perception, a quiet form of navigation that charts could never capture. The sun descended slowly, warming skin and spray in gentle contrast. And sailors closed eyes briefly, absorbing warmth, motion, and moisture, letting perception converge with memory and sensation. Each breath a quiet meditation, each subtle shift a lesson in rhythm, continuity, and harmony with the surrounding world. Shadows of unseen creatures moved beneath hulls, long shapes gliding silently through currents, and sailors observed without alarm, sensing life hidden yet present, recognizing that the ocean was alive in many forms, carrying history, companions, and silent instruction in every swell and wave, a guide to those willing to perceive. The horizon hinted at distant islands, softened by light and haze, yet sailors did not quicken, letting suggestion remain gentle invitation, trusting the subtle lessons carried by water, wind, and reflection, knowing that true passage was measured in patience and awareness rather than distance or speed, in subtle rhythm rather than urgency. Sunlight glimmered across ripples in shifting diamonds, and sailors' eyes followed each flicker, letting brightness guide perception while hands moved in arcs on oars, body, memory, and intuition merging into a seamless dialogue. Each motion a meditation in trust, rhythm, and quiet mastery of movement through vast, uncharted water. The air carried faint traces of vegetation, sun-baked stones, and lingering salt, and sailors inhaled deeply, letting memory merge with perception, forming layered understanding of place, movement, and timing, sensing that navigation required not charts or instruments, but careful attention, patience, and attunement to subtle forces in constant motion. Hands moved instinctively on oars, repeating long-learned patterns. Each stroke a conversation between sailor, vessel, and water, each motion carrying knowledge of currents, swell, and rhythm. Every gesture steeped in trust and attention, every movement a quiet, flowing mastery of presence, memory, and adaptation to the living sea. Clouds drifted slowly, shapes softening and sharpening, and sailors' eyes followed them, observing impermanence and subtle change, seeing reflections of their own rhythm in sky and water, understanding that awareness itself was a guide, a map, and a teacher, invisible yet ever present in the quiet flow of perception. Tides shifted imperceptibly, waves lapping at hulls in measured repetition, and sailors responded in subtle adjustments, letting tactile feedback guide motion, understanding that the ocean spoke in pressure, pull, and rhythm, a language that required patience, sensitivity, and attentive presence to hear fully, spoken to those willing to listen. Temperature shifted gently, light softened, and sailors closed eyes to absorb sensation, touch, sight, and breath merging into perception. A quiet meditation on interconnectedness, rhythm, and trust. Learning the language of wind and water while letting the infinite continuity of motion wash over body, mind, and spirit. Occasionally, faint shapes moved beneath the surface, reminders of life unseen yet present, and sailors watched quietly, noting subtle shifts in light and motion, feeling comfort in continuity, companionship in hidden currents, and a reassurance that the ocean held knowledge and guidance in every fold of wave, subtle and constant. The horizon softened as twilight deepened, sunlight stretched in long amber reflections across gentle swells, and sailors paused, resting hands lightly on oars, tasting salt on lips, inhaling layered scents of sea and distant land, letting perception deepen, memory weave into sensation, absorbing the quiet poetry of motion, rhythm, and reflection. Birds returned to glide low over water, wings mirrored in gentle ripples, effortless flight reflecting wave and wind, and sailors observed silently, sensing kinship in motion and presence, understanding that navigation came from observation, patience, and subtle attunement, not from instruments or charts, and letting trust and perception guide their passage. Twilight deepened fully, water shading into violet and silver, and sailors leaned back in quiet reflection, letting oars rest. Absorbing textures and movements of the day, the gentle rise and fall of hulls, sense of salt and hidden greenery, touch of wind and spray, and the layered memory of motion and rhythm carried within body and mind. Night arrived softly, stars emerging faintly and mirrored in dark water, and sailors drifted toward gentle rest, dreams threaded with distant forests, islands, and the tactile presence of water on skin, salt on lips, and slow, infinite motion of the sea, forming a quiet, shared rhythm with waves, wind, and the eternal ocean. And so the sailors continued, guided by subtle observation, intuition, and rhythm, finding maps in sensation rather than compass or chart, letting awareness, patience, quiet perception trace paths through the expanse, trusting the ocean to teach, to carry, and to accompany them toward horizons still unseen. The morning light stretched slowly across the horizon, soft and golden, touching the forest and the shore with a warmth that felt like memory itself. And the sailors rose from sleep, their bodies heavy with rest, yet light with wonder. The air carried the mingled scents of sea and land, salt and soil blending with the faint sweetness of flowers hidden deep in the forest, and each breath seemed to anchor them more fully to this world they had long sought. Their footsteps pressed lightly into the sand, leaving prints that filled with water and shimmered briefly before vanishing, and the sailors smiled silently, knowing that even their passage was gentle, leaving no mark heavier than a sigh upon the earth. Birds circled above, their wings bright against the sky, calling out in notes that rippled across the clearing, and the sailors listened, feeling as though the forest itself spoke through these creatures, offering welcome and witness to their presence. The tide moved quietly, pulling small shells and driftwood toward the shore, and the sailors bent to touch the smooth surfaces, feeling the worn textures that spoke of journeys both short and long, of currents and winds carrying treasures from unseen places. A branch, partially buried in sand, gleamed with the morning dew, and one sailor lifted it, turning it slowly in his hands. Sensing the time it had spent floating upon waves before reaching them, a fragile link between water and land, between journey and arrival. The forest whispered behind them, leaves brushing together in soft currents, the trunks swaying gently as if breathing. And the sailors stepped closer, running fingers along bark, inhaling the humid fragrance of life hidden beneath the canopy, feeling roots reach beneath their feet. Fires flickered faintly inland, the smoke drifting upward in lazy spirals, carrying the scent of cooking and warmth, and though the inhabitants remained unseen, the sailors sensed the quiet presence of others living in harmony with the land, their lives intertwined with soil and stream. The sun climbed higher, illuminating the intricate patterns of ferns and moss, the veins of leaves traced in golden light, the shimmer of dew upon spiderwebs, and the sailors moved slowly, as though each step might disturb a sacred arrangement, a living tapestry of Earth's quiet design. They came upon a small clearing where water collected in a pool, its surface reflecting sky and leaf alike, and they knelt beside it, letting cool fingers touch the stillness, drinking deeply of water that tasted like time itself, pure and patient and endless. A bird landed nearby, watching them with bright eyes, its wings folded close, its song soft and curious, and the sailors held their breath, feeling the fragile trust extended in silence. A delicate acknowledgement of presence shared between traveler and inhabitant. The wind shifted, carrying scents from deeper within the forest, of blossoms opening, of damp roots, of smoke curling from unseen hearths. And the sailors inhaled deeply, letting the fragrances fill their lungs as though storing memories of place within their own bodies. Their eyes traced the horizon where land met sea, the coastline winding and hidden, revealing beaches and rocks, forests and hills, and they understood that this place was alive. It's not a destination, but a beginning, a world whose rhythm would carry them forward as gently as waves upon the shore. They wandered slowly along the beach, hands trailing through sand, touching shells, pressing their palms against stones warmed by sun, feeling the textures of life shaped by tides and time, and the ocean whispered behind them, steady and eternal, as if applauding their arrival. At noon, they found a grove where fruit hung heavy, its scent rich and intoxicating, and they sampled cautiously, the juices sweet and warm upon their tongues, tasting sunlight, soil, rain, and the quiet work of nature that nourished both body and imagination. Shadows lengthened as the afternoon deepened, the sky softening to muted blue, and the sailors paused in a shaded hollow, lying upon fallen leaves, listening to the symphony of insects, birds, and distant waves, letting the chorus wrap around them like a lullaby from the earth itself. They spoke little, their words measured as if the air demanded respect, and instead shared glances and smiles, the unspoken language of those who have traveled far and arrived without ceremony, understanding that their journey mattered in the quiet accumulation of time and breath. Evening approached, the sun dipping low, casting long ribbons of gold across the water, and the sailors watched, their reflections mirrored upon the tide, mingling with the colors of sky and sand, as though the land and sea themselves held them within a gentle embrace. Fires glimmered faintly in the forest, and they could sense figures moving, preparing night, tending warmth, their lives carried in rhythms as old and steady as waves, yet unseen and unobtrusive. Quiet coexistence with the world the sailors had crossed to reach. The breeze softened, carrying the warmth of day's memory, and the sailors lay upon the sand once more, their bodies cradled by earth, their minds drifting through images of forest, sea, and sky, the texture of bark, the fragrance of flowers, the pulse of waves beneath their hands. Stars began to appear, faint and silver, emerging through the veil of night. And the sailors traced them quietly, not for navigation, but for remembrance, feeling their light fold into the memory of the journey, a celestial witness to every stroke of oar and every ripple touched along the way. They slept lightly, dreams filled with glimpses of distant shores, of fires and shadows, of fruits and streams, of footprints, both theirs and others. Their subconscious walking among traces of life they had found and the silent song of the land they had entered. Morning came again, the tide gentle, the forest breathing, and the sailors rose to wander. Not in hurry, but in reverent observation, noting the subtle changes of wind, the scent of earth after night dew, the glimmer of fish beneath shallow waters that shimmered like light captured in glass. The memory of their voyage lingered, the open ocean behind them, its rhythm and salt etched into their skin, its waves and winds folded into their pulse, and yet the land held them now, steady, patient, alive, offering not dominion but presence, a quiet permanence against the fleeting currents of travel. And as the day stretched on, they became part of that stillness, their breathing blending with the murmurs of stream and leaf, their hands touching stone and root, their feet pressing into sand and soil, the forgotten sailors dissolving into the land they had sought so long. The horizon remained, softened into blue and gold, and they understood that they were not at the end, for the journey continued in memory, in the pulse of tide, in the song of birds, in the scent of blossoms, each moment folded into the fabric of a world already alive. Evening returned, gentle and luminous, the fires inland flickering like constellations on earth, and the sailors lay together upon the beach, listening to the ocean breathe, the forest hum, the unseen inhabitants tending lives beyond sight, their hearts full of quiet satisfaction and timeless awe. Night deepened, stars multiplying, the waves steadying into eternal rhythm. And in that vast, encompassing quiet, the sailors became whispers themselves, carried into memory by tide, wind, and soil, a story folded gently into the soft pulse of earth and water. And in the silence of the world, where land met sea and forest met sky, the forgotten sailors rested at last, their journey complete not in triumph, but in the quiet knowing that they had crossed oceans, followed instincts, and arrived into a world waiting, alive and breathing beneath their hands.